truly make or break customer retention and revenue. Um, I am the founder of Hexus AI, a product storytelling platform for customer enablement, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm excited to dive into the nuances of what actually makes onboarding. Here's something to think about. 90% of your customers decide whether they'll stick with a product within the first 30 days. Yet, many SaaS companies still struggle with onboarding drop offs, misalignment between sales and customer access, and missed activation opportunities. So, today we're going to tackle these challenges head on. Joining me today, we have some of the top practitioners who are going to bring in deep insights into onboarding success. And the way we structure this discussion is it's going to be a natural, interactive conversation, then a rigid Q&A. Each topic will be covered either by Neelu, John, or Michael, and towards the end, we'll also open it for a live Q&A. So let's dive right in. Neelu, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Sakshi. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Happy Friday. Happy Good Friday. Thanks for joining us. I'm Neelu Sheikh. I'm based out of Bay Area, and I've been working in customer experience, I would say, out of customer success journey for post-sales since we've been inventing it and maturing it. I've built CS teams, global CS teams for Coupa, Tipalti, Google, and ZoomInfo. Onboarding, especially, very close to my heart, interesting topic, and also very strategic in ensuring that customers are finding that value early on and sticking with it, that customer experience early on. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, John, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, John Gleason. I'm the founder and managing partner at Success VP. Success VP is a fund where most of the LPs are customer success leaders. Before starting the fund, I led customer success at a company called Motive, and I led there through just hyper growth. I led there from $1 million in ARR to $300 million in ARR. So one of the things I can talk about is, how customer success scales at really every stage of a company's growth, and onboarding is a huge part of that.
Awesome. Michael?
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for joining on a Good Friday. So my name is Michael Solomon, and based in Miami, Florida, and I'm the global support director at a company called Exact. We provide an ERP solution to the heavy equipment dealerships. So part of what I do is really building and mapping out our customer journey and bringing them from the project into the support phase, right? And that means taking care of all the onboarding activities. So this kind of this topic in particular today, same as Neelu said, is very near and dear to my heart, right? Onboarding, make it or break it in our customer journey. So it's extremely important. So I'm really excited to be here and trying to make sure that at the end of this conversation, you guys can have a better understanding of, based on our particular professional experience that we all bring to the table during this call, you can try to see what's worked and what hasn't, right? That's kind of the goal at the end of this conversation. So looking forward to have a conversation with you all today.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. So to kick things off, like one of the things we hear is onboarding is often seen as, it's a nice to have. It's not a growth driver. But when, as practitioners, and like when you are in the business, we know that that's not true. And it can actually be the difference between success and churn. So, according to you, what are some of the biggest onboarding challenges specifically SaaS companies face today? Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely, Sakshi. Thank you. So, from what I've seen, from what I've experienced, right, as far as onboarding challenges, I think one of the main issues that I've seen in many companies is kind of not having a clear understanding of what is responsibility of sales, what is responsibility of customer success, and then support and moving forward, right? That misalignment between sales and customer success or overall customer experience very often create a lot of challenges in our customer journey. So this is extremely important that we always pay attention, and we try to kind of address customer onboarding from the sales phase all the way into the support line, right? And delay time to value, for example. Anything that the customer cannot see the value in the first 30, 60 days is also one of the biggest challenges, right? That's what it's going to make it or break it. It's extremely important that we cannot pay attention to those challenges, and we cannot have a structured approach to onboarding. So misalignment between sales and success or onboarding teams, Sakshi, is kind of one of the biggest that I bring to the table today.
No, absolutely. And completely agree. Like, especially as organizations grow, alignment itself is like such a big challenge. One is obviously onboarding, but how do you really align the whole organization into a shared mission and thinking about customer success in a broader term? John, why don't you talk about like some of the your experience in this space?
Yeah, well, and I think like you called it out earlier, which is a really good point to make is, sometimes we think of, onboarding as the task that needs to get done, but rightly said, great onboarding is an accelerant to growth, right? And when you think about it, um, Michael talked about time to value. Well, I always framed it to my sales team at Motive was, hey, the faster we get this customer up and running, the more days we have to work with them on the other side of them finding value, right? It's a different experience working with a customer who's found value in your product versus
Mm-hmm.
one that's still onboarding. On the other side of that onboarding found value, um, you can sell them. You can share the other great things that you have to offer. They become referenceable, right? Referenceable customers start kind of that flywheel for growth. Um, Also, just they start to put less pressure on the business, right? If you have a customer who's well onboarded, they generally have less support tickets. We saw that in our data at Motive. Companies who had, completed everything in a timely way and had driven a breadth and depth of feature use generally were less a burden on our support organization as well. They had fewer support tickets, fewer escalations. So I just think like, you really have to start at like square one with customer success, and square one is onboarding. But it's not just a defensive game. It's actually really an offensive game. And it truly is like the accelerant for growth. So I would say, generally what I recommend to startups when I'm working with them is, okay, you start to get, your founding CS motion going. The first thing that I think is really important to specialize in is actually fantastic onboarding. So I think like, yeah, you and Michael really like hit the nail on the head there. Growth and just the importance of getting to time to value rather quickly.
Yeah, I think one thing I would add there is a lot of time we use one size fits all, right? And the specifically what changes we've been seeing last couple of years, the customers are demanding a different relationship with businesses. So before, even with segmentation, we had onboarding tailored to SMB, onboarding tailored to mid-market. Customers are now asking for a unique relationship, whether I'm SMB, mid-market, enterprise, deliver me that unique relationship, unique value for what tailored to me. And that is where I think we make a biggest mistake in designing onboarding processes. And I think that is the challenge if we tailor it to thinking, keeping customer in mind. That would go a long way.
No, absolutely. And to what you said, like, how do you think about like some of the Nilu in some of the organizations you have worked? Some are really complex products, some are really simple to use products. How do you think that changes based on, like just how the product is and how these orgs are structured?
I like to actually divide onboarding into two areas, right? One is customer enablement, and another is actually product integration, which is the implementation. A lot of time we club it as we just talk a broader onboarding. the KPIs are different for each of that. So once you disintegrate this and within your organization and make your team accountable for those particular areas, implementation is always going to be dependent on the data you need, right? It's all about getting the right data within the right time, and everything you guys talked about earlier, Michael, John, about time to value, that really is dependent on that piece. So having a great experience early on for the users is important. And then the second part is enablement. And that's where you can have a lot of control about personalization, about sending in more bite-sized information. Also, your customers are constantly changing. So their roles are changing. You have personnel changing. So example, at ZoomInfo, we had a lot of seasonality of how salespeople use the tool. We would like salespeople to be living in the tool all the time, but that's not where they want to be. So how do we deliver the value when they need that, intent data, the important information, and also keeping them engaged throughout. So one of the within the discovery process, one of the things I had really looking at what are those adoption metrics make the most impact in retention. We had about, when I got there, 20 plus adoption metrics, and I went to product and said, which ones do you want to focus? Which ones are the most important? All are important, but you may have a different ones. And I said, that cannot be true, right? We all work for the same goal. So we need to come to an agreement of having the adoption metrics, which are most important to customers, which are most important for stickiness and retention. So we had about adoption committee, a cross-functional team, 3 months process, 6 of those metrics. One of them was Chrome extension. Now, if a customer had Chrome extension installed, and that really helped them be within the tool more and get most, this is LinkedIn Chrome extension within ZoomInfo. And just having customer interviews and really looking at the data, that was a huge shift, right? 30% of adoption increase, having that, and really including that in our first 90 days journey was very important.
No, absolutely. Makes sense. So there is obviously onboarding from a customer perspective, and there's an onboarding from business perspective, and looks like you were able to combine like what does success look like for both a customer as well as a business. John, what are your thoughts on, like how do you really define success both for a customer as well as a business and align those and also align that internally because looks like you have to also align that with the product team and the customer success team to make sure everyone is also aligned in what is success, what is onboarding success even.
Yeah, well, I think to find that you have to go maybe even one notch back, right? And sometimes this is going to be explicitly defined, sometimes it's going to be more implicitly defined. But when a customer comes to a company and they buy from you, there's basically this promise, right? It's, hey, I have this pain point, you have this solution. I'm buying your product because you can fix my pain point, right? And so there's some sort of quantifiable metric in that mix, right? And generally, like salespeople are really, really good at quantifying what that metric is in the sales process, right? You generally don't sell, especially in this environment, nice to haves.
Right.
And so I think it's actually really important to go one notch back into that sales process and capture, what that quantifiable value-based outcome was. Generally these things are going to map to one of two things. It'll be either more money made for the business or more money saved in the business, right? And so I think it's really important for great onboarding when we're starting to align kind of the business outcome is to really bridge into that sales process. You're actually seeing a lot of organizations now doing what's called like forward deployed customer success or onboarding, where that motion is actually reaching into the tail end of the sales process. And then when you get to, the onboarding side of things, sometimes, if you're kind of dealing in the SMB or the long tail, you don't have the capacity to have these conversations. But if you're moving up into mid-market and enterprise, you can. And I think it's really, really important when you're mapping your customer journey, because onboarding and customer journeys go hand in hand, to map it to that business driving outcome. And either, first with your team, first with your product team, your sales team, your broader go to market team, start to map out, okay, what are the things that need to happen in order to get the customer to this point where there's this return on the investment that they made, this ROI. And then you want to surround that journey with your people, with your processes, and in some cases, actually, and probably increasingly more now, with how your product just works. And so, you should be able to go down all of your accounts and based off the depth and breadth of feature uses, plus some maybe squishier metrics, actually know that there's this business outcome, there's this ROI driving. And I think so many customer success teams or onboarding teams, they kind of stop at the, hey, they're using this one feature that we like, or hey, we got a great NPS score, but they really start to neglect all of those pieces that go into that return on investment. So I just think that's so important.
Yeah, I think one thing I would add. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, you're go ahead. I can go after you, Neela.
No, I think it's such a valid point as John was talking about it. Like those goal setting. One of the things which has really impressed me, and I think every one of us have had this experience at some point, is Duolingo. I love asking customers to do their goal setting. The gamification of onboarding, also giving customers the clear progress, the feedback loop has been. I mean, Duolingo has one of the highest retention rate in customer within the edtech, right? And a lot of companies have looked at that model, both on like how do you actually do push notification on marketing, because it defies that a notion for us which says, hey, if you send too many push notifications for customers, they don't like it. And I actually have used it for a while for Duolingo to, like, when I look at the email, I'm like, oh, I need to spend my 15 minutes. And I love seeing my progress metrics. So I've loved that aspect of that business alignment that we were talking about earlier, that goal setting for customers early on and personalizing that, right? Depending on where the customer is. And tracking their progress through that. I also want to call out Notion because that's another product which is very PLG, and they've done great job in really giving you that whole onboarding process, right? How you make it easy and follow through. But Duolingo definitely is one use case study, I would say, on onboarding.
Yeah, Duolingo is like one inspiration on making onboarding actually fun, like
Yes.
both from a customer's perspective, you're always looking forward to what is the next message they're going to send and how crazy they're going to go on like some of their campaigns. And you're actually excited to see like what that company is going to come up with. And you're right, like even when I am learning something, I'm like, okay, now I have to do it because this notification's really like forcing me and like, or going to be like rude to me or like that whole persona it's developed. But Michael, you were
You know,
something.
oh,
Yeah,
sorry, Michael, go ahead.
just to add something on this very interesting conversation that we're having right now. So please remember the people we're working for, right? At the end of the day, those are the customers, right? When we talk about defining successful customer onboarding experience, what does that mean for our business, but what it really means for our customers, right? And we need to make sure that we align our business outcomes or whatever we want to achieve to really what is bringing value to our customers. Because I think something that a lot of companies do today is focusing too much on metrics, right? Without really taking into consideration if what we're trying to achieve is bringing value to our customers. And that's really an important phase of really the customer experience, which is the onboarding, because that's really when a customer can become an advocate for your business or not. And we're only going to achieve that if they really see value on what we're bringing to the table. So when you see customer success, let's make sure that the word customer continues to be the most important piece of it, because at the end of the day, that's the people we're working for, right? Those are our customers. And sometimes organizations and teams, because they're too much focused on metrics and KPIs, they forget that the customer is there, and that's the value that we need to bring to the table all the time. So
Yeah. One thing to even tie to that, just like customers, and then tying it back to the Duolingo piece. Um, I think in customer success, sometimes, we're B2B software type people, and, we forget that our customer is also like living in the real world too. And they have these magical onboarding experiences in their consumer products, and I think sometimes like B2B onboarding processes are so clunky, they're so bad. And we forget that in our personal lives, we have these beautiful onboarding experiences with Instacart. The first time you hail a Waymo is this magical experience. You're using even ChatGPT for all of your personal life type things. And I know the other day there was this interesting like update around memories, memories in ChatGPT. And the way in which they pulled me into using that feature was like actually pretty magical. And so I would say, to Michael's point, it's like keep your customer at the center of it. People don't just live in the workplace and live at home, and these experiences transcend. And I think there's this real expectation now for beautiful onboarding experiences, and sometimes that actually may involve working with your product team as well. And the best CS leaders I've seen, or the best onboarding professionals I've seen, actually spend a lot of time in other parts of the business with other leaders in really positive ways, not just harping on them, but really like building that node to the customers. I think that's like the highest order thing you can do as a CS leader is be that voice of the customer, like Michael said.
No, absolutely. And that makes so much sense on like what you're mentioning. Obviously, customers are not siloed. They're not like, oh, this is a B2B product, so my expectations are going to go down, even though I'm using other products like ChatGPT, which, give you an instant aha. The aha moments are expected much earlier. User expectations are everything's going to be like instant. And you have to like make sure that your product is catering to those users who are using other tools, who are very used to tech being really fast. But to the other point you mentioned on, like how do you make sure that you align with the product teams and good CS leaders talk to them? How would you thinking about that structure, and what is a good team structure for customer success? And how would you make sure that customer success is reporting to the right org, and like right goes up and has the ability to make the right decisions? So what would you suggest as a structure, and how does that change as the org grows and as the team grows?
Well, I think that's the really important thing is like customer success post sales is really going to evolve as your organization grows. I think sometimes like, you can log onto LinkedIn and people are getting so dogmatic about, no, this is the right way to do customer success. And my team has these 3 teams and this is absolutely the right way. And that person is probably right. And it's the right thing for their business at that right point in time for those specific customers. But I think that like if you like go all the way back, right, in the beginning when customer success organizations are being formed, or even companies are being formed, like you're a founder, this intimately, right? In the beginning, it's just you and your co-founder. You have somebody technical and you have somebody more business oriented. It's like the original sell. And then generally what happens is you start to sell. And one person goes deep on selling, but they also go deep on supporting those customers. Founder-led sales, founder-led customer success. Then eventually you hire your VP of customer sales, right? You usually will do that long before you do your VP of customer success. They start selling, and now there's this work to be done on the post-sale side. So the natural break is sales, post-sales. Then within that, generally, what's going to happen is you're just going to have one person doing everything. They're going to be proactive and they're going to be reactive, and they're going to do onboarding and they're going to do renewals, right? And that's okay, right? Because you just don't have the volume of customers to support anything more than that. But naturally, what you're going to see, probably the first break that's going to happen in most organizations is you're going to break out reactive support from proactive. All right. So you're going to start to spin up a support team that is there, maybe even phone call type support, very reactive. And then you're proactive. And so now you've got this proactive bunch. And this is where generally what I recommend is onboarding will start to break out. You'll structure the organization, break out onboarding from the rest of the CS motion. And the reason you do that, and um, you know this intimately, but onboarding is a little bit more of like a throughput motion. It's a little bit more like project based work as opposed to account management, customer success, right? Customer success people have this loaded capacity. In other words, they take on new accounts. The more accounts they take on, the more saturated they get. It's harder for them to support another customer because their book is $2 million, it's $3 million. You add another customer, they're like, I can't do this anymore. I'm just supporting too many. But onboarding is a little bit different, right? Because if you reach that time to value, like Nilu and Michael were saying, they then kind of pass out of this like project based beginning onboarding phase of their journey, right? So it's actually this like area where you can create real capacity and scale in your business as the velocity of new logos picks up. If you get really good at quick time to value and bringing customers from pre-sales into sold and onboarded, it's a throughput motion. So you actually pick up a lot of capacity there. So naturally, like the first structure you'll probably see is onboarding breaking out from account management. And then I think like just more broadly, right? What tends to happen in that mix is founders get more and more and more and more and more disconnected from their customers. And if we think about the world in which we live in right now, we can build products at a faster pace than ever before, right? I'm sure you're writing code with Cursor or Windsurf already, right? It's magical. We can, in fact, release product at a faster clip than ever before. So what does the real moat become? Real moat becomes knowing your customers at a deeper level than your competitors at a faster pace. And so what you need to do if you're a leader in the mix, maybe you're a CS leader or maybe you're a CEO for that matter, you need to find a way to make sure that the core of your business is deeply connected to your customers, right? So all through that, you want to create an org structure where the CEO and the people building the product become highly connected to that end user, that customer. Just like Michael said, keep the customer in the center of it all. So from an org structure, there's about 1,001 different ways you can slice and dice this at scale. When you get to be $100 million, $200 million, $300 million business, maybe you're $1 billion growing, super fast still. There's lots of ways that you can slice it, but the through line is the best founders, the best CEOs find a way to stay deeply connected to their customers.
Yeah, and exactly what you're saying. As we start believing that AI and automation is going to get better, like right now, obviously, the challenge is AI needs to get better, start supporting certain workflows. But let's assume like that is the case. At that time, the differentiation is not that you're doing automation. It's like, how good are you really understanding your customers? And then the human touch is going to start mattering even more. It already does, of course, but that's going to be a differentiator instead of the technology, which is the differentiator today. So that totally makes sense. Michael, what about you? How do you think about team structure and how do you think about reporting and like some of the organizations, especially like as John said, like it is such an evolving structure. You cannot have one size fits all. The business changes. And obviously, as a start of a company, as a founder, obviously at a certain stage, you will be the customer success, but at some point you are going to have to delegate and have to grow that team. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me say, John, you just gave a master class on how to build an organization from the ground up. So that was awesome. Thanks for that. So yeah, so one size never gonna fit all, right? Our ability to adjust our organizations and our teams to our customers, right? Depending on the segmentation, the industry that they are, it's really what's gonna make us successful long term, right? We are not going to give you a framework that you need to follow in every single time because customer needs and customer journeys and experiences, they keep evolving. And as such, our team needs to evolve. What I can add to this conversation on top of what John says is like, for example, there are companies that they have different roles on their team, right? They have a specific team members that are taking care of the onboarding, right? And then once the onboarding activity completes, you can add the customer success managers to take care of the customer relationship after that. It's really going to depend a lot on the industry and the segmentation that you're trying to get into it, and how you approach, right, the onboarding is also different. There are some customers, right, that they may be low touch, for example, that you just can build digital onboarding for them so they can follow those onboarding activities kind of self-service. There are others that they may need a customer success manager taking by the hand and making sure that it's just depend on the type of customer and what you're trying to build there. And while I was preparing for this webinar today, I was reading the news about HubSpot that I believe that they said that they have customers onboarding specialists, right? That really guide the customer through the structured 30, 60, 90 days. And then they transition that to a customer success manager. But again, how you structure your team will depend on how your organization is structured, right? What are the business outcomes and what are you trying to accomplish as an organization as far as what the overall customer experience is. Please remember, customer success onboarding is the overall customer experience, right? This is really what we're trying to accomplish, and we should not forget that this is kind of the main point of contact and the first entry, the first real contact of the customer with our organization post sales is really during the onboarding. So the way you approach it, it really depends how you are structured and what are really kind of the value that you want to bring to those conversations. So it really depends on the segmentation, the industry your customers are, but overall, it's probably a mix between onboarding specialist and customer success manager, taking care of the overall onboarding experience for the customer.
No, absolutely. And there are so many ways you can chunk and piece it. And sometimes it is a trial and error. And like orgs do change. I mean, bigger orgs, like they have to make sure that they're setting them, their customers to success, which is the
Right.
main reason to even do all of that. Coming to a different point, and I know, Nilu, you mentioned a little bit about metrics like time to value, and obviously the companies like Notion, or like even when we have worked with companies like Calendly that are very PLG driven, time to value and the activation rates, all of that become really important in terms of metrics. How do you think about that versus, for bigger companies, like how do you balance what is the metric and what are some of the metrics you have seen work in some of your past roles that have really successfully defined and aligned the teams together?
Yeah, I think when it comes to metrics, it's really, I like to keep it more simple and less is more, right? Like be very specific. And I'll come to it, but time to value is not one of my favorite metric. When I say that, it's not really about time to value. It's such a broad and generic, subjective statement to say time to value on onboarding. I like to define onboarding metrics in three buckets. One is how do I align with business metrics? So business objective alignment, product adoption alignment, super important, right? How do you actually measure what's the value customer is getting? And the third and most important is how are we building trust with customers? So what is that? The way you measure it, CES, CSAT, informal, but the important metric there is really, do customers trust your product? Do we have a high support volume already in their first 90 days? And that is going to really affect how they perceive your product, how they think about retention. What they say is that the seed of churn is sown in first 90 days. And these are all the areas where it affects. So going down to business objective is really about then coming back to what everyone knows. What is that first meaningful outcome? When you talk about time to value. So really looking at customers' journey and defining that. And for some product, it may be day one, like Duolingo, or some of those gamification, the games, Lumosity, the mind sharpening game. Like for them, it's day one versus a product like Tipalti, where we wanted customers to, it's a global payment platform, and we wanted customers to get their first payment on, right? Within 7 days, within their 30 days, depending on the complexity of ERP. So first meaningful outcome. and then subsequent meaningful outcomes. And already also defining earlier, I think, John, you mentioned about throughput. A lot of organizations make a mistake about that throughput not defining what that timeline is. And you will hear this all the time about, hey, customer does not want to let go of the onboarding person, right? We have a very technical person, and how do you get them out of this loop? And it's really about not defining that clearly. So if you define your journey of onboarding, whether it's 90 days, whether it's 30 days, 60 days, or 6 months, and creating those meaningful outcomes throughout the journey. So, and I'm a big believer in MBOs. Even my CS team always have carried the quota, but do define your leading indicators to create those MBOs and measure them and refine them, because you're not going to get it right the first first trial. And then you have product adoption metrics. I talked a little bit about that earlier. Really knowing which product adoption is going to matter for customers in those early days. You don't want to cram everything. You don't want to get customer overwhelmed. I think that is where Sakshi and I were at an event just yesterday, another onboarding event, and one of the participants talked about that for them, success is defined till everything is moved over to their product. So from their competitor product or the product they're replacing. And that seems like a really big, heavy task, not just on your team, but even on customer.
Yeah.
And the way I like to do it, and that's where the meaningful outcomes is to break it down. And take an example of Google. If you are moving the loads from AWS, it's all about in pieces, which loads are you moving and how do you get them to faster, I'll use the term time to value, get to that first load out, and then more. So I like to break it in more meaningful, measurable pieces than setting this large, massive goals for the teams and customers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have seen, like, in our own experience, in our own company, like really narrowing down the definition for us. It is obviously a product content creation platform. As soon as they start creating the first a demo or a first guide, that's kind of the metric we have done, which is much easier than the first time they actually publish and they have analytics. Obviously, we can consider that as also a successful metric, or sometimes when they share. But it's always like, what is the right metric right now, and how have we associated that with churn, usage, and how do we get the real customer metrics and the real business metrics, which is eventually retains to revenue, and like how does that really tie in? So that what you're saying really resonates, in the sense that what is the time to value is so varied over businesses, because it's not like everyone's time to value is going to be like, oh, the value is X, because the value could be Y. The value could also be actually migrating your whole software. Maybe that's the only way they were able to measure value, and they can't do it in chunks, and that's not good enough. So that is like, success is so varied. But yeah, I'm curious, Michael, what are some of the concrete metrics you guys have defined on, y'all have seen like that has aligned the teams really well?
Yeah, for example, the industry that I serve, which is the heavy equipment machinery, I provide an ERP product. For our customers, really time to value is really the ability to print the first invoice, right? So that ability for our customer to make sure that they can send invoices out to customer, it's really what they see the value on it when they first get into it. But I cannot make sure that I emphasize and agree more with what Nilu was saying about product usage. What's the problem for a lot of organization and customer success team is focusing on metrics that are really, at the end of the day, is not bringing what the customer thinks is value for them, right? It's sad to see a customer go because they never found the value on the product that you offer, right? And that doesn't mean that the product was bad. That means that they never found the value on your product. So for a lot of times I see teams just not focusing on make sure that the customer find the value in your product, other than focusing on metrics that at the end of the day, the customer, it doesn't add any value to them. So focus on make sure that the product as usage and the product adoption for your customers is really bringing the value of the investment that they did in your product. Because you don't want to see a customer leaving your company because they never found the value in the product, and you may have a great product, but the value was never there for your customer. So that's what I want to, the message that I want to convey today is really make sure that you focus all your efforts on bringing the value that the customer needs to find in your product, especially if it's you are providing a product as a service. Okay.
And you know what? I'm gonna CYA for all the CS leaders out there too. Sometimes your product is really, really bad. And sometimes your product doesn't even have an opportunity to deliver value. And so I always say to founders, before you start to scale your go-to-market motion, really ask yourself in your heart of hearts, do we have a product market fit here? Is there this atomic unit of value that we can give to customers? I'll tell you a story on that. I started to talk to all these CEOs, founders. They had great investors at the table, and they would call me and they say, John, customer success is not going very well. And I would ask them all the questions about their CS leader, and I would kind of think like, well, I think I'd probably do the same thing. I don't think this person is all that bad. And then I would start to ask some questions, and what I would learn is like they'd kind of fallen out of product market fit. They raised a whole bunch of money. They drifted away from their customers. The market had changed. It had evolved, and customers no longer were seeing that value in it, and they were experiencing massive churn. And I will say, we like to say how great we are in customer success and we can solve all these problems, but one thing we can't do is we can't solve churn when there's no product market fit. Basically, customers are saying when they churn, hey, I signed up, there was a promise, your product couldn't deliver on that promise. And part of that is what you said, Michael, but part of it sometimes is like we really got to get tight with our customers as CEOs and founders too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that is a very difficult problem to really recognize, right? Like it looks like even at the CEOs you were talking to, and they were trying to do everything correctly, and it's like figuring out what the issue is. Is it a CS person? Is it their strategy? Because sometimes obviously it is a strategy. Sometimes it is how you're onboarding. Maybe that wasn't correct. But then at some point you do have to take a step back, and at that point you do realize like maybe it is not a repeatable value product. It may have been at some point, but it has fallen out of customer love. And then that is a very, very difficult change than fixing CS or fixing your onboarding, because, yeah, those are like just fundamental problems for a business. Uh, but absolutely. Now, coming to the next one on we always think about transitions between sales. Like one of the things we discussed that when sales is trying to sell and sales has obviously made a promise that your product will do XYZ, these are some of the outcomes it's going to achieve. How do we make sure that the handoff between sales and your customer success team is smooth? And how do we make sure that customers don't feel abandoned and don't feel like, okay, now this has been handed off? And how do we also tie that back to product and give that feedback in, like going a step further to make sure? And I know, Nino, you mentioned that, so I'm going to start with you on like how do these different departments work together to ensure that a customer is feeling that success? Because obviously if a customer's bought a product, there is some like reason they're thinking that this product will solve. And John, as you rightly mentioned, like in today's environment, people are not buying nice to have, so they must have really wanted this at a point in time, and they must have thought that it's going to get them some value at some point in time.
Yeah, great question, Sakshi. John talked about the organization and talked about how do you break down the CX organization. Then what do? We build the organization, we build processes, internal processes, we find that there are challenges, and then we expect customer to go through their journey with our processes and our teams. So, you have support, and I've seen emails, and I'll not name names, but when I saw the first email, the transition email, so onboarding email for customer, there were 5 names in that email. If you have a question on this, go here. This is your support email. This is your person. I'm looking at that and I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Do you expect customer to write this down, like have a post-it on their computer or look for this email every time? Because if I was a customer, I would never know how to connect with your organization. So I have coined this term, and it's one throat to hug. We've always heard of one throat to choke, but the idea is that I don't need customer. The onus should not be on customer to know where they are on the journey or who they are dealing with. Now with automation and AI, there is a lot more better way of creating that one point of contact, and then internally for us to divert and escalate where the path needs to be. So that is where I think the most important thing about the handoff is knowing what sales has sold. And some of the conversation earlier, John and Michael talked about as well, is that ROI, right? Like what we have delivered. Having that internally really through all the organization, right? Either your database repository or automation, I strongly believe in providing your teams, your CX team, your CS team, a context and also prescriptive guidance on where they are going, and not really putting, again, onus on them to figuring out where the data is. We can do this way better with a lot of tools available today. I think that is one area. AI is an assistant. I think we've gotten it, and we need to use it better. Whether AI is an agent, it's a different story yet. Whether AI will start taking action on your behalf, but it is at least in a place where you can really understand the data. So that handoff, you need to use more of AI as an assistant too. So traditional way of that handoff, I would not even start talking about that anymore, right? Because we need to live in this new world, new structure, but have one throat to hug. A lot of time in a complex environment, it's your CSM, a person who is your quarterback, and ensuring that relationship consistency is there. So the how you build the trust, how you build the relationship on that path is important. And secondary, I think the important piece is when to bring in the right people. So it's a lot of times, and I've seen some great AI toolkits today, right? Who's eliminating that? Like there are some stats I saw. It takes 6 hours and an average for CSM to get back to customers, and there 60% of the query CSM say I'll get back to you on, which can really shorten it by like 15 minutes, right? Depending on how the complexity of the problem. So those are, I would definitely utilize the AI toolkit on the handoff. So this is a little different than organizational handoff, right? Like we're really thinking about design it based on how your customer is looking at it. From customer's point of view, and the secondary piece where human intelligence is needed, I would add something on that organizational point of view is that create skill-based teams. So being able to really get to the right people is much more easier. So it's really, as AI and automation is happening, I see more and more organizations created on skill-based, and that's really helping in a much better handoff, much better customer interaction and outcomes, frankly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if audience has any questions right now, we can start also taking them. But Michael, I'd love to know from you, like, what do you think about, these handoffs, and especially with AI? Like, obviously, we are living in 2025. Like, what handoffs used to be, or like what organization structures used to be, like, are not the same anymore. So, how do we think about those handoffs and that alignment today? And like, how, if you had to think about some of the trends, like how you would set that up for success?
Right. So usually what we need to think is that the sales team will earn the sales, right? And then customer success should keep it, right? And really the bridge between sales and customer success needs to be strong and consistent, right? All the time. It needs to work all the time if we want to provide a great onboarding experience for our customers. That communication between sales and customer success as part of the overall customer's experience will always need to be there. And there are organizations that sometimes this interaction is not as strong as possible, and that creates confusion during the onboarding and the overall customer journey. Really, my approach to taking a look at what tools to use and when to use it, it really depends on making sure that you have the process mapped out first. For me, everything starts with the process. We all need to map our processes and the tools that we're going to use in the end of it. It's really going to be a result of our process, and our goals will have to be right. Yes, AI and many other automations opportunity will continue to help bridge some of the main pain points that the customer can find during the onboarding. But for me, the most important is really making sure that we know and we understand what is the process that we need to follow and what part of the process each one is responsible for in our teams, right? It's accountability during that process is extremely important. But the message today, at least from my side, is make sure that our team talk more to the sales teams, because sometimes that doesn't happen very often, right? Sales is their own word, and then customer success is their own word, and sometimes that gap there, it really doesn't add any value to our customers. So it's important that we talk as much as we can with sales, so we also understand what they're bringing to the table, right? It's this is all one team really at the end of the day, making sure that our customers are served the best way possible. And yeah, so make sure that your teams are really aligned with the sales team, right? That interaction and that bridge is strong as possible, and that will create a consistent onboarding experience for our customers.
Mhm.
No, absolutely. And John, obviously, you are working with a lot of emerging startups and a lot of emerging companies as well. What are some of the trends you see, and how would you suggest people, just even broadly, structuring these handoffs between product, between customer success, sales, and what are some of the areas where they can really use technology versus obviously there are things where, as Michael also mentioned, like you have to communicate. Like talking to sales and a CS cannot say like I'm only going to look at all of these notes. They have to talk to sales. They have to talk to product teams to make sure all of that alignment and all the shared vision is there. But where are some of the areas you think handoffs can be automated? Where are some of the areas where there is just opportunity for a lot of automation?
Yeah. So, okay, sometimes I think we have this really hard situation as CS leaders where we're, pushed to do the new innovative solution in order to get the job done. Again, we go on LinkedIn and we see all these people doing these fancy new things, and there's always a new tool coming out there. And I always say to CEOs, or always say to that first CS leader is like, be careful that you're not like, let's call it majoring in the minors, right? Make sure that like the fundamentals are there, that you have like a core degree before you start doing all of the extra things. And so, before you go down that route of, finding that agentic agent to do this handoff process for you, what I would say is like just make sure like yeah, the foundation is in place. And I always think of like the foundation for handoffs as almost being like a hardwood floor, right? When you look at a hardwood floor, the boards don't line up perfectly straight like this. They're staggered, they're layered, right? That creates strength in the floor. If they were all lined up, you'd have a point of weakness, a point of failure. And so, there are going to be transitions in an account from sales to onboarding. Maybe there's professional services, maybe there's a renewal team, expansion, sales is loop backed in, you're doing EBRs. There's always going to be these transition points, but make sure at that transition point that you're structured in a way that there's lots of team overlap so that the catches can happen, the knowledge transfer can happen. And this can like really, even just set you up for like long-term success. I found that in our business at Motive, there was a direct correlation between a CSM leaving. In other words, they stopped working for us, they went somewhere else, and higher churn in that book of business. Transitions really hurt your customer. And so just, yeah, be multi-threaded, be multi-layered, be like a strong hardwood floor. And then you can augment that. But don't start to augment when your structure isn't there yet.
No, absolutely. And what you said makes so much sense. And like fundamentally, the things don't change, right? Like you have to fundamentally make sure that things are structured well in terms of who's going to manage the relationships, what are the roles, what are the responsibilities. And at that point, like once everything is structured, and you know that there are areas which, I mean, even Nilu mentioned, like there are areas where things can be automated. At that point, you're like, okay, this is repeatable by a human. You know,
Yeah.
this has to be done. Can this be templatized? And at that point you're like, okay, this is a repeatable task and let's just automate this workflow. And that time you will actively seek a tool versus like, let's look at this shiny tool on LinkedIn and let's figure out like in our org how do we even adopt that.
Yeah,
um,
because
yeah.
just to add, and sorry about interrupting there, I've seen so many people trying just to get into the newest and fancy tool without knowing what is it that you want to fix, right? What is it that you want to accomplish? It's not just jumping on the new without knowing that you need to accomplish something first, that you want to fix something, that you would like to be more efficient. And that should be the message here, right? Understand what is your business, what are you doing, right? And then from everything that you're doing, take a look to see how the new tools or everything that is there can help you to automate and produce more efficiencies to you. That really should be how we approach AI and all these new tools moving forward.
No, absolutely. And I know we're at time, so just some parting thoughts and like, thank you everyone, firstly. Like, I know it is Good Friday, and thank you so much for staying. This was such a fun conversation. Obviously, we at Hexus are big believers on setting up customers for success, the whole onboarding journey, but also like we are bullish on AI being able to solve some of the very routine tasks which CSMs and customer success leaders should not be doing, all around like creation of demos, guides, and also product related content, which is not the work of customer success leaders, but actually the little work of automated agents as well as AI. But any parting thoughts, Nilu, Michael, John, love to you guys to just leave the audience with some thoughts and then we can call it a day.
Yeah, thank you. Use your data. Data is your golden mine to personalize.
Yeah, from my side, thank you all for joining today. And something that I would like to give us all some thoughts of it. Every single thing that we do, make sure that we make it repeatable, right? So we can scale as we move along, that we can always measure and make it human. At the end of the day, that's what we are. We are human beings working for human beings, right? And so let's never forget about it, and we should be good moving forward. Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't say that better. That was awesome. Good work. Thanks everybody. I'm honored to get to be in this group.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll obviously have a recorded session and send a follow up soon after. All right.
Thank you all. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.